Hello again. Welcome to another segment of Friends of Wisdom on Beyond the Fundamentals. Today, I am really excited to have Dr. Michael Martin here to try and have a dialogue with. I'm looping here. Friends of Wisdom. So let me just try and... Sorry about that. So without too much introduction and all that stuff, I guess we'll just try and dive right into it. Just so everybody knows what they should be looking for here is a number of things. Is to have them have themselves in a liminal space of curiosity, and that is the thing I'm going to try and do in conversation with Michael here, and see if through that genuine curiosity, if I can tease out some little nuggets of information by which we might be able to cultivate some sort of wisdom. Because I don't know if anybody's familiar with Dr. Martin's work, but he's a very, very unique Christian philosopher, I guess you would say. So I guess I'll let him speak for himself.
Unique is better than weird.
So Michael, could you just try and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself personally, and then how that personal stuff kind of enmeshes in the work that you've been able to produce over the years?
That's easy. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had a pretty eventful life. You know, I've done a lot of different things. I started out as a musician, as you can tell, still surrounded by musical instruments. And I actually had a record deal when I was 18. But I got bored with the music business, which is a horrible business, and left when I guess I was about 26, and finally went to college, where, you know, surprisingly I found that I actually belonged in college at that time, which was weird because I had such a miserable experience of school, K through 12.
Yeah.
Especially 8 through 12 was pretty miserable, you know. So it was just deadening, and I hated it. But sometime between the ages of 19 and 26, I discovered philosophy and reading, you know, and was a pretty voracious reader. And when I finally went to school, I actually knew why I was there, and I was interested in everything.
Yeah.
Nice. And that led to me eventually becoming a Waldorf teacher, which I did for 16 years. And overlapping my career as a Waldorf teacher, I started teaching as an adjunct at the college where I had graduated from, then finished my doctorate in early modern English literature. And my specialty is religious writing of the 16th and 17th centuries, and in particular metaphysical poetry.
Okay.
John Donne and George Herbert and people like that, Thomas Traherne. But combined with that, I had encountered this concept of Sophiology, probably in my early 20s, when I read a biography of the Russian philosopher Vladimir Soloviev, which this kind of really interested me. And it was always present. It hadn't been a real study or anything, but it was always something I was aware of. And when things fell into my path that may have, had a sociological bent to them, I was always interested. It was really hard. This is back in the 90s. It's really hard to find Russian sociological philosophy until Christopher Bamford at the Lindisfarne Press started putting them out. He was getting these old, some of them had been translated, say, in the 30s and 40s, but had been out of print, and he started to put them back into print with new prefaces and things. And it was like, it was wonderful, because that desire I had to read this stuff came out. And then finally people like Eerdmans and quite a few other publishers started to put out the works of Sergei Bulgakov. And when I was in college, I had the very great fortune of getting a tutorial in Christian existentialism from a guy who John Macquarie, who translated Heidegger's Being in Time.
Yep.
So my tutor had Macquarie as his doctoral dissertation advisor. So he, and I had found at some used bookstore a book by Nikolai Berdyaev, and I told him, this is a really cool book. You read? And he said, let's do it. So, and he was really familiar with Berdyaev, so it was really wonderful to study that as an undergrad. But besides that, there was not much out there. And so eventually, when I'm doing my doctoral work, I was I was writing my dissertation, one chapter on Thomas and Henry Vaughan. Henry Vaughan, the metaphysical poet, and Thomas Vaughan, his twin brother, who was an Anglican priest and an alchemist. And so I had to read everything that they wrote, and I was seeing sociological elements in their poetry, especially in Henry Vaughan, where in his poetry, nature has such a vibrant place in his poetry as a place a place that it can somehow disclose God. And that's a very sociological intuition.
Okay.
And it was interesting because, if you read other poets from the time, nature is just a cipher for them. It's not a real thing that lives in a way. Even Shakespeare, who writes beautifully about nature and husbandry, it's with Vaughan, nature is a site of revelation, or at least a potential site of revelation. And so I was studying them, and I saw these sociological elements, and I saw the influence of the German mystic Jakob Böhme, or Jacob Boehme, as some people call him, on those two. And then I decided the last chapter of my dissertation would be on the Anglican mystic Jane Lead, or sometimes pronounced Jane Lead, who was a part of a group called the Philadelphian Society, which we don't talk much about them. We don't hear much about them. But they were a group in England, kind of ecumenical group. And she became their leader, even though she was obese, probably from untreated diabetes and blind. She was their leader, and she was a mystic, and she had visions of Sophia. And she too was influenced by Jakob Böhme. So it was wonderful to do this. And I remember writing the dissertation, and I was telling my advisor, somebody should write a book about this stuff, because no one's written. And then that ended up being the next book I wrote, which was The Submerged Reality. Okay.
So I guess the question that comes to mind is, I'm very ignorant about Sophiology and find it. I had a discussion with Jedediah Pascal a couple weeks ago, and he had kind of introduced it to me a little bit, which kind of led me to you.
Okay.
And I think from what I'm getting from it thus far is something like that. In the course of Western history, there's a moment or like a time period where the so-called scientific method is kind of emerging as this systematized mode of inquiry about the world, which is predicated on a certain set of axioms that are very reductionist in terms of someone's actual experience. And what I mean by that, to be a little bit more clear, is it kind of ignores the personality of a person, or the character, or the soul of a person,
right,
who is the agent engaging in this method. And so we get, I don't know, hundreds of years of people engaging in this type of practice. And what that means is that agency, or human experience, is stripped out of a person's mode of being. And what I'm hearing from not just Sophiology, but Sophiology, is that there is also this line of people, or small communities of people, which have not forgotten a mode of being which may trace its lines back to more axial age, methods of wisdom, really.
Right.
So that's my really bad attempt.
No, that's good. And I think you're right. And what, so the weird thing is this kind of starts, well, in the modern age. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made that there was a kind of Sophiology present in First Temple Judaism. Okay. Which, if you know Margaret Barker, that's basically what she's arguing. And she's important. She's an important scholar, I think. But what happened, so in this late 16th, early 17th century, this is when Jacob Boehme, who was a cobbler, he was not an educated man, starts having these visions of reality. And the idea of Sophia being the wisdom of God, right straight from Proverbs 8 in particular, and he identifies Sophia of Proverbs with the Virgin Mary. So as Jesus is the incarnation of the Christ, she's the incarnation of Sophia, because just like in Proverbs, for instance, when in Proverbs 8, where wisdom describes herself as the helper of the Lord at the creation, what does Mary say at the Annunciation but behold the handmaid of the Lord, right? So it kind of starts with him, which is almost like providential, because right around the same time is when Cartesian metaphysics makes an appearance, and Francis Bacon and the scientific method, right? And so what you see in I mentioned Thompson, Henry Vaughan, so they're kind of early proponents of this, and they were scientists. I mean, Henry was a physician. His brother was a physician and an alchemist and a priest. And Jane Led, who was not a physician, and her group with John Portage, another important figure there, and he was an Anglican priest. They saw what he was doing, and for them, it kind of reinvigorated the Christian imagination that they saw was under threat by this kind of rationalistic scientific materialism that was coming from Bacon and was growing stronger throughout the 17th century.
Right.
And then Descartes, right, with the disinterested observer, the myth of the disinterested observer, right, which it took until quantum mechanics to prove that wrong, that there's no such thing as a disinterested observer, because the observer influences the phenomena, right? So there's that pushback, and And when I remember at my defense of my dissertation, one of my examiners said, "Why did you pick all these weird people?" I said, "Well, that's what E.P. Thompson, the Marxist critic, calls the enormous condescension of posterity. Because if you would have talked to Henry or Thomas Vaughan, they would have said that they were upholding the Christian vision as it was articulated in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance.
Okay.
With the planets being intelligences, right? The bodies of angels, and that,
right.
And so they were saying no, they wanted to do science, but they didn't. They thought to ignore the spiritual aspect of a human being, like you were just talking, right? Or the spiritual aspect of creation,
right?
Was only to do half of science, right? And I've always thought, I said, wow, what would happen if all this research funding and support had gone into that vision rather than the materialistic vision, which is kind of interesting.
Wow.
And then what happens though? So, sociology never made much headway in popular culture. 17th century, there was a flowering. It shows up in William Blake. And then what happens kind of goes underground a little bit, though it's definitely present in German pietism. And then it comes back with the German Romantics. And because the German Romantics, and I've been teaching a course on Romantic poetry, the German Romantics were rejecting the Enlightenment, right? And the impoverished vision of the Enlightenment. And so they were going back to feelings and emotions that are all important parts of our experience, and they we're looking to, well, then what happens. So one example is if you know the Sistine Madonna, famous painting of Virgin Mary holding by Christ by Raphael, with these little faces of babies in the clouds behind.
Okay. Her. Yep. She's holding him with her left arm, right?
Yes.
Yep.
And it's famous painting, and it is. I think it still is, but it was in Dresden at the time, and it really made a profound impression on Goethe.
Yes.
So in the second part of Faust, at the apokatastasis of Faust, when he's saved from damnation, he's saved from damnation by the Mater Gloriosa, or the Mother of God, and even Gretchen, this woman he had ruined, prays for his salvation. So it's and that's why the last line of Faust is, "The eternal feminine leads us ever onward," which is, that's Sophiology in a nutshell, right there.
Okay, so I want to stop at Goethe for a second here and try and see if I can sort of trace the line of the picture you just painted for us here. So it sounds like in the course of history, you're articulating a particular historical perspective which stems from Descartes and Francis Bacon, and the instantiation of the more formalization of this scientific method, and that this mode of inquiry about the nature of the world is a little bit maybe haphazard, yet it seems to produce a lot of results that are quick, maybe premature, but people are getting a hold of it, and it's growing rapidly because it can close the parameters on some sort of propositional formula about the world or something like that.
Right.
And so this gains headway as anything that's expedient would. And there's a point at which the Enlightenment happens. In, I guess, from a certain perspective, the Enlightenment could be seen as like the triumph of this scientific method as the predominant ontological system of the world. And there's a reaction to this that's subtle, but just in my personal in studies and things like that, I understand the Enlightenment to also characterize people like John Locke, Bishop Berkeley, David Hume, these empiricists, and that there's also a reaction to that in the form of Immanuel Kant, who kind of, in a way, starts this new transcendental way of looking at philosophy and the scientific method. And we have Newton coming out, and Kant is trying to, reconcile all of the chaos from this new scientific empiricism. Says Hume awoke him from his dogmatic slumbers. And so Kant does this in Prussia, in the German area, and he starts this movement of German idealism. And from what I understand, so I've read portions of Faust, and a long time ago, I think when I maybe 10 years ago, I read The Sorrows of Young Werther, which I didn't get at all. It was just, but I didn't get it from I have no better way to say this, but I didn't get it from a propositional standpoint. But there was something about the way Goethe was able to characterize and express Werther that I resonated with in this way that I don't have, is at the limits of my language. So I understand Goethe as being deeply integral in this movement of German idealism, which would include Kantian successors like Schelling, Hegel. I don't know who else comes to mind, but you're saying that Goethe gets a hold of this, right? And I also know that he's looking to shift this scientific method through a mode of poetry. Is that right?
I wouldn't say that's what he was doing, but he approaches science like a poet would he approaches nature like a poet would. And so he was rejecting Newton in particular. And he called the scientific method, what do you call it? The mechanical dogmatic torture chamber, because you submit phenomena to torture to make nature reveal her secrets, which was that was a famous way of thinking about things during the Enlightenment, is we'll submit nature to torture. And so, and as Mary Midgley, you know who that is?
No.
British philosopher, and she's hilarious. But she talks about this, and it's appropriating the language of rape. So that the kind of it's conquest, right? Conquest. It's a different kind of conquest, and it's a conquest of nature, and it's treating nature as something to be ravished, which Goethe, being a poet, rejected outright. And so he came up with another method, which he called a delicate empiricism, which is the beginning of phenomenology. And for Goethe, the idea, and later this is picked up by Husserl, by Franz Brentano, is you let nature speak. You don't impose your will or your conceptual life onto nature, because that way you'll never get to know with the phenomena. And that's why he didn't trust scientific instruments, for instance, because they got in between the human and the phenomena.
Okay. So maybe we could say something like the scientific method is the attempt to explain nature, and like,
but it's not just to explain it, it's to exploit it.
Exploit it and explain it. And there's this other reactionary method that's like the opening in Proverbs 8, I think, is something like wisdom crieth in the streets.
Right.
Like the first thing is like she's calling out as like, hey, you simple people, listen to my voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so there's this call from divine wisdom that is in these ways, you know, lamenting the actions of the simple, and calling the individual or what have you to listen and hearken
Right.
to her voice.
So here's what happens, though, and we've all experienced this. And this is what I realized, and this is, I don't know how long ago, but I think I realized it as a child, but didn't have a vocabulary for it till I was my 40s, probably, is that because we've all had this experience where something shines through, we'll say nature, but it's not just, could shine through poetry or music, where something breaks through. And what is that, right? And that only, in my experience, that almost always, sometimes it just breaks through on its own, but very often it breaks through when the person's in a contemplative state, an open state, right? And so we have this experience of nature that, you know, you sense the presence of God behind it. Or in poetry, you know, that's something opens up, and maybe you've read the poem 20 times and it never happened. You read it this one time. Well, what was that? And the arts do this, right? Love does this, you know, and that's what the Romantics were pushing. You know, they were saying, wait. And that's what Goethe was saying, is that's why you let phenomena speak to you. And you have to listen, and you have to be patient, because, you know, it doesn't respond to coercion very well, this experience. And you know who does a lot of this in his work is the filmmaker Terrence Malick.
I'm not familiar with him.
He's
a current filmmaker?
Oh yeah, he's alive. He did his most recent film is A Hidden Life, about Franz Jägerstätter.
Oh wow, I've never heard of this.
And The Tree of Life was, I think, probably his best movie, best known. And The Thin Red Line, which is on Guadalcanal. And all of his films, you have this experience where he tries to depict it in film, that there's a world that's that accompanies the world we experience. That's the real world, right? You know, but we have to learn how to see it. And there's a line in the Thin Red Line where Jim Caviezel's character, the guy who plays Jesus in
The Passion,
he says he's a pirate or private who has been arrested for going AWOL, and he tells his sergeant, who's played by Sean Penn, he said, "That's another world." And Sean Penn's character said, "There ain't no other world but this one." And it's and that's the thing. And there is not. I mean, we look at all the stuff that's going on in Ukraine or over the last 2 years with all the pandemic stuff, you know, and all the craziness that accompanied it. And there's another world. I've seen another world. Right. And I think that's the world of Christ in Sophia.
So not to shift gears too much, but try and, do you think that there's a way for, just give you a little bit of context. So on this channel, we've been trying to engage the Bible with a new set of eyes. And I think that we're really ultimately what we're trying to do is calibrate or tune our epistemic capacity to listen to this other world that you're that you're kind of outlining here. And that's been, I guess it's been kind of a difficult transformation at to some capacity.
Right.
And so do you think that, basically the question is, do you think that there's a way to approach scripture that's not necessarily predicated on this whole just seemingly like dead and binary hermeneutic method of like exegesis, eisegesis,
right.
And because it almost, but also at the same time, not just approaching it with this woo-woo kind of randomness, I guess you could say,
Well, so in literary studies, when you get a doctorate in English, it's not a fun experience because most most interpretive modes in advanced scholarship in literary studies, they're not doing literary studies, they're doing political studies projected onto literary studies. So you'll do a feminist reading or a Marxist reading of something, right?
Right.
I drove me insane and all through my college and university career and with colleagues, and because I think that's, talk about violence of the text, doing violence to the text. And that's why, my reputation is more in philosophy because, I kind of come out of this phenomenological tradition, going to Goethe, but certainly in Husserl and Heidegger, where you just listen to the text, in poetry, and it's amazing. I call it an agapeic reading, agapeic criticism. In my book, what's the name of that book? The Incarnation of the Poetic Word. The first essay is about doing agapeic criticism.
Okay.
Which is not a criticism, not charged with a political agenda.
Okay.
And so you read it at, is what Husserl would say. You return to the things themselves, right? So you return to the poetry itself. And I think you do the same thing with scripture, because the problem, it's not the worst problem, but one problem with reading scripture, depending on what school you're approaching it from or what dogmatic camp you're in, you're going to read it through that lens.
Yeah.
And again, there was a funny meme I saw not too long ago about, or maybe it was a story, I can't remember what it was, but it was something along the lines of how fun it is to study theology because you read scripture and you found what they told you should find. You're not going to find anything else. And I think that's what happened to Burma, going back to the 16th century or late 16th century. He didn't have that because he wasn't part of the academy. So he could read the Bible, this is as Luther said they were supposed to do. And he was Lutheran, So he read it and he said, oh, look, it says Sophia was there. It says wisdom. God's wisdom was there. Maybe God's wisdom is a divine person. Where'd you get that idea? The Bible, right?
Right. So that's so funny because so this specific channel was sort of conceived with the the prerogative to like refute Calvinism, right? So it's taken the channel into this all kinds of inquiry into the ideological roots of Calvinism or modern day systematic theology. And so a lot of those roots trace to Luther, and then in his because he's an Augustinian monk, trace to Augustine, right? Whatever. So do you
Hans Urs von Balthasar calls this the difference between theology at prayer versus theology at the desk. Very different thing, right?
Okay, so yeah, could you expound on that a little bit? Because I think I know what you're saying intuitively, but
well, I mean, if you're doing, and this, you see that, I mean, you go through any theology department. I mean, there are people in theology departments who actually don't believe in God, who don't, who like Bart Edelman, right? Is that his name? He's a great example. I mean, he's great. I guess he's a great scholar. He's got interesting ideas, but he doesn't believe in God. And what I interviewed Margaret Barker a couple of years ago, and she said it's like having somebody who teaches French, who doesn't know the language, has never been to France, and isn't even sure that France really exists, right? and there are theologians like this all over the place.
Yeah.
All right, and that's theology at the desk.
Okay. So
and theology at the prayer, it comes out of a devotional or contemplative tradition.
Okay, so there's a really big parallel here that I kind of want to try to tease out or point out, is that we outlined this history line of the reduction of experience through the mode of the scientific method down to this almost dead way of living in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be, at least a little bit of the signal I'm getting, is a parallel line in terms of modern theology, in that there's so-called theologians who are the analogy, the metaphor is, are theologians at the desk and not in prayer. And so the desk is the dead propositional space.
It's the Enlightenment. That's what it is.
Okay.
It's scientific reductionism.
So I think that my personal observation is that, for whatever reason, maybe because of, I hate name dropping, like all like in just catching, trendy waves and everything, but like with the emergence of people like Jordan Peterson and others, a lot of Canadians really, which is, I don't understand that yet.
It's Canada's moment right now. Huh?
It really is. Like I found myself last week with the whole like Canadian thing, like with the protests and like the shutting down of the country by the people. Just like, dude, like Canada is just like the place to look.
Nobody saw this coming. Yeah,
right. Nobody saw this coming. There's. Okay, let me back up a little bit. So when I was like 13, and started almost like awakening my conscience and developing my personality and interests in the world, I had my grandmother buy me Richard Dawkins' first book.
Oh, really?
The God Delusion.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I wasn't brought up Christian or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? Like I had been to, I went to a Catholic school when I was little. And I had been to an Eastern Orthodox church, a couple times, but other than that, my life was completely what you would consider secular. And I had my grandmother. I don't know. You know what? I think I remember being in the bookstore, and I was 13 years old, and I just saw this like silver glistening book, and it just drew my eye, and it said The God Delusion, right? So it drew my interest, and I was like, I need this book here. And so I caught throughout high school and then college, I caught this wave of so I was in college in like 2008 into 2012. I caught the wave of like the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So
the new atheist,
these atheists. Okay. And I got interested in philosophy, so I majored in philosophy. And there seems to be this like recent reaction to that what they call new atheism, and it seems to be headed up by people like Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke and such. And I would like to catch this wave and see where it goes. But I'm also getting the sense that there's been people for 60 years or so that are still alive that have been trying to say the things that these more publicly known figures are saying. And I feel a little bit of pushback with some people in terms of like updating or being willing at least to update the arena or the mode by which they're taking in information.
Mm-hmm.
So like there seems to be this shifting from like this debate-ish, ideological proposition set pitted against this ideological proposition set, and then we duke it out. Meanwhile, foregoing all of our humanity and personal experience and connectedness to each other and therefore the world. And it seems like we're coming into a space where it feels to me like, this is my observation, that there's a shift going on. And I don't know, you've been around longer than me. So do you sense the same thing?
I've been sensing it for a long time. In my book, Transfiguration, which I think did come out in 2017, 2018, I anticipated kind of what's been going on for the last 2 years with this gigantic push for a technocracy. But I didn't think it was going to come that soon, right? It came much more quickly than I had anticipated. But I saw it coming. But on the other side of it, I think, and in fact, a friend of mine called today. I haven't talked to him in a while, and he was saying the same thing. He thinks that we're on the cusp of something possibly wonderful, because if this fraud of the technocracy gets exposed, as it's been, I think what happened in Canada was part of it. That there is a possibility that something, a terrible beauty could be born, to use William Butler Yeats' phrase. And I think for me that terrible beauty is a sociological engagement with the world.
Okay.
Which for me it's not just a propositional intellectual paradigm, it's actually something you live.
Okay.
So and like you said, with community, I mean, there are many resonances with romanticism, but with conviviality, with how we enact in celebration with others, how we interact with the natural environment. And I'm a biodynamic farmer, for instance.
Okay.
And a big part of the sensibilities that I have philosophically are directly a product of, dealing with the real things of this world on a daily basis. Like this morning, I split wood for our fire for our wood stove for a couple hours this morning because it was backed up, and dealing with cows. And I just, right before I came in for this interview, I had to take care of my hogs, and so you're dealing with real things that need attention, and you're dealing with nature and different kinds of, when I was splitting wood, different kinds of wood because they split differently, right? You're engaged with real things. And then for us at our farm, that's also augmented by the ways in which we celebrate the Christian festivals. Not just, I mean, Christmas and Easter is basically, I have 9 children. It's if we keep it just to our immediate family, it's still a huge party. But we also do big outdoor things on Michaelmas, and we do May Day, and we have a really wonderful 12th night celebration we do, and we celebrate St. John's Day with jumping over fire. So all those kind of tools of conviviality, to cite Ivan Illich, we bring in to our experience. And I think economically, this kind of breaks you out of the system too, right? For instance, we deal a lot with the Amish.
Okay.
I buy feed from the Amish. I use Amish butchers, and Amish guys put my roof on. So, and it's a different experience to be in that, and it's a kind of Christian anarchism, right? Which it's outside of the system, and rejecting the system, just like Henry and Thomas Vaughan were rejecting the scientific materialism of their time, and the Romantic poets were rejecting the Enlightenment. And I think there are always those. There always are those movements in the world, which we could call, I guess, an alternative modernity.
Right.
Or you can call it, what's the other thing? The counter Enlightenment, it's also called, right?
Okay.
And I think you see that all, since Burma. I mean, sometimes it's more present or more obvious than at other times. I think sometimes it can be a little overly extravagant, like when in the late 19th century, when they had the occult revival happen, for instance, right, with Eliphas Levi, and French occultism was kind of taking off. But that was a response to the Industrial Revolution, right? And and then in the early 20th century, actually in the late 19th, early 20th century, the rise of Theosophy, Blavatsky and Theosophy, and Rudolf Steiner and Anthroposophy, those were also counter Enlightenment movements. Whether there's anything of value in them or not is beside the point, I think. And you see it also with William Butler Yeats and his poetry, and the Inklings, even with Charles Williams and Owen Barfield. There's always this current that's running alongside the master current, I guess we could call it, which is trying, and sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, to alert us to deeper realities that once we lose them, we lose a significant portion of humanity, and our own humanity.
It almost sounds like the notion, the biblical notion of like I forget what the phrase is, but it's something to the effect of like, I'll reserve for myself like a strange people, like a people who, okay, right. So that are that are almost there as what you said as like an alternate current to the main current, which is a nice way to think about it. And it's like they're there as, mainly in the Bible. I think you get that sense from the Old Testament in the functionality of Israel, is that this is what the intention is. And maybe part of like recalibrating or re-rendering your own participation with reality has to do with opening up not just like a disagreeableness to like the mainstream of things, but like a wondering or a curiosity about these alternative currents of culture and of wisdom traditions that are oriented towards things that if you have the chance to participate with them, radically reshape your perceptions on the world, and new things become important and relevant and valuable to you, right, which is like ripe ground for the transformation of your life.
Well, I think that's what Jordan Peterson and especially John Vervaeke are doing right now. Right? John's project of the crisis of meaning, right?
Right.
And I know from experience as being a teacher and a professor that there's such an impoverishment of imagination in students because they have not been exposed to the wisdom tradition at all. I don't think I was, but I taught a course at a Dominican college. I don't even know what the name of the course was anymore, but we had to read Marcus Aurelius and the Tao Te Ching, Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Yep.
Simone Weil, because when I taught Intro to Philosophy, I would use Pierre Gedo's book, Philosophy as a Way of Life, right?
I am literally just at the end of that book.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
It. Can I just say that? So I got an undergraduate degree in philosophy for whatever that's worth. And I am so deeply ashamed that Pierre Gedo was never brought up to me, especially in my ancient philosophy class.
Yeah.
If I could just, some of the notions that he comes up with, like the figure of Socrates, the mask of Socrates, like the Socratic irony of, Socrates as the fool. And then behind that, Socrates as, this wise person. And behind that, the intentionality and worldview of Plato, and it seems to me that, like, I have this little thing in my mind when it comes to, I don't know if you're familiar at all with like modern like rap or hip hop, but there's this thing in hip hop where rappers have like little diss tracks where they disrespect each other back and forth. And it makes these beefs, and they come out with some pretty good songs and things like that. They're clever, very poetic, and, humorous in a lot of ways. Sometimes I see that kind of a game being played through the line of Western philosophy.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They're all like taking digs at each other.
Yeah.
And when I read Gedo, I feel the sense of like the gentlest, kindest. He's like so. He affords the benefit of the doubt to everybody, and he has something really wonderful to say about everybody.
But he does it by taking philosophy away from the specialists.
Mm,
You know, he gives it back to the people. I
yeah.
think. I think that's what he does, because that's what I noticed, where students in an intro to philosophy course could respond to that, because it was finally philosophy talking about the problems and the things they wonder about, right?
Yeah.
Or what, as Charles Taylor calls them, the life questions, right?
Yeah.
Which is what the Romantic poets are. I mean, all the great literature is also facing the life questions.
Yeah. So like, why would anybody want to enter into really, like, if you just take a moment and take seriously this life questions thing,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really vulnerable space to be in.
And it's
And so
it's the perfect space for an 18 or 19-year-old to be.
r-
That's where they are already.
in a space, right, it's natural.
Mm-hmm.
And so why are we putting them in a space, where they're trained to ask those kinds of questions in a rivalrous way? Because that's how philosophy was presented to me.
That's right. They want wisdom and they get Peter Singer. What's with that?
It's like the introduction was like, okay, here's Socrates, right? And watch how Socrates just bludgeons his opponent with, all of this, sophisticated technique, So you think that, so it misleads people into thinking that philosophy is something that is meant to be rivalrous, right? It's an intellectual,
it's a competition. It's
right,
bullish.
right. It's like a intellectual tool that you can use to beat someone else up. And I think that on this channel sometimes people will come at us with Colossians 2:8, which is let no man spoil you, or beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy or vain deceit, after the rudiments of the world and not after Christ. And it's
but St. Paul was trained in Greek philosophy. That's why he's able to do that.
Right. So and it's like, we've pointed out that it's like the warning is not against philosophy. The warning is against being spoiled. Right. And so when I look at
losing
the
your
education that I got, there is this sense of a spoiling effect where it's like you're not going to be afforded the space to ask genuine, vulnerable questions in a space where there could be a mutual discovery of those questions. There's like this premature expedient race to who has the most explanatory power about the thing.
It's very, I don't know, it's masculine or whatever, you know what I mean? It's competitive, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to, I don't, and who are the philosophers that don't do that? And that's why what I think attracts me to phenomenology, because they're trying to just return to the things themselves.
Right. That's Heidegger's whole, so much of Heidegger's project in Being and Time is like, how do I restructure this Aristotelian, like, massive ontology or treatise on the world? It's like, how do you hit the restart button on it? Because the thing is you're trying to hit the restart button on a system that is so robust and so rooted into the very fabric of our own cognition. Like, people don't even realize how much somebody like Plato or Aristotle, formulated the very grounds by which they perceive the world.
Right. Well, I'm glad you use that word restart or reset, because that's how I describe Heidegger. Being in Time was philosophy hitting the reset button. And for instance, I think one of his examples, right, with the example of the hammer, philosopher, what's this thing? Oh, this is a piece of wood over here, and it's got metal on the side and a claw thing. And that's not a hammer. You want to know what a hammer is? Start driving nails.
Right.
That's how you know what a hammer
is. Yes. It's like the functionality of the thing, the meaning of the thing,
right.
Not
it's
the categorical descriptions, right? Descriptive of the thing. Yes.
Yeah, and you can't be a disinterested observer about a hammer.
Right. So wow. So, one of the coolest things that I have like all of this admiration for you already, which is, there's something to be said for a person who not only is conscientious and adept at communicating or articulating themselves in relaying, who they are in a relational way to other people, but the commitment, and I don't know how to say this in a way that's like not on like a virtue or moral spectrum, but it's like you actually seem like you've been able to somehow in your life maintain that conscientiousness, but also allow yourself to participate in the world, like to the like in a deep way, like you're splitting wood for a couple hours, this morning, and you're doing all these things. And I think that what I'd like the audience to take note of is how the cultivation of wisdom is probably not going to be found in sitting at the desk and studying, and in this way that like you just said, Michael, in order to know what a hammer is, you you need to go drive some nails. So in that regard, what do we have till like 6:30?
Yes.
Okay.
I get till 6:30.
Okay. So I have this. Okay. I'll take this opportunity to sneak this in here. So do you watch any of the classic Disney movies?
I have.
Okay. So I have this thing that I haven't really shared with anybody except my wife and some close friends that I would like your take on, because I think it's kind of cool. It's exciting. I think it's unique. So you know how Jordan Peterson does this little spiel with Disney movies like Pinocchio and The Lion King. Have you seen any of that?
I've never caught any of his stuff on Disney.
Okay. Well, basically, he in some of his classes that he's been teaching at university, he uses Disney movies like The Lion King or Pinocchio in order to convey, kind of his Jungianism, like classical archetypes about things. There's a lot of like Joseph Campbell kind of themes going on in there. So have you ever heard of or maybe seen the Disney movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame?
I think I saw part of it a long time ago.
Oh, okay. So
where he's the really sweet-tempered handicapped guy, and not like in Hugo.
Yeah. Yes. So it's off of the book The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, and I think it's written, I think 19th century, mid 1800s or something like that. I think I haven't read the book, but because I've noticed this, I'm kind of tempted to. So I have applied a sociological, like in my complete ignorance of sociology, what I'm thinking is a sociological interpretation of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, because I think that somehow implicit in this story is a message which isn't like the classic Disney movies, like a coming of age, like, Simba in The Lion King has to learn how to become, who he's meant to be and grow up and all of that stuff. But in the Hunchback, it's all predicated on these notions of wisdom. And there's two characters really in the movie. So the main character is Quasimodo, which is to say half formed, right? He's the main character, and he's the victim of a tyrannizing theologian in the form of Judge Claude Frollo. He's a holy man who's concerned with purging the streets of Paris from the gypsies and, the filthy, sinful people. And what ultimately, so these gypsies can be seen as like that alternate current of people in the city that we were talking about before. And it's so strange because Quasimodo's mother tries to smuggle him as an infant into Paris, and ends up getting caught and then running to the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And so she's running away from, this tyrannizing figure, and she's banging on the doors of this mighty cathedral, asking specifically for sanctuary, right? And she doesn't get it. Quasimodo gets stripped away from her, and then the holy man murders her on the steps of Notre Dame, and then imprisons Quasimodo up in the bell tower, and says that he'll, like, I'm going to keep this infant because I'll have use for him. He might be of use to me in the future. And so I interpret Quasimodo's mother as wisdom. Okay. And what happens when these so-called, scientific reductionists or propositionally based theologians, the theologian at the desk, when they get a hold of power and use their explanatory power to basically tear away the human being from wisdom. And when that happens, that human being is a monster. It's a Quasimodo, a half-formed human being.
Right.
And so basically what ends up happening is Quasimodo meets another woman as he gets to be 20 years old. And, she's a gypsy, and she's basically allowed sanctuary in Notre Dame. And so when wisdom is given sanctuary into what Notre Dame is called the soul of the city. So, you think of Plato's notion of the city.
It means Our Lady, right?
Right. Yeah. So, so actually it's funny because when in the movie, in the animation, when the judge rips away Quasimodo from his mother and then murders her, one of the reasons why he keeps Quasimodo alive is because there's this image which is a depiction of that painting by Raphael. So there's this huge statue who is it's Mary, and she's holding Jesus. She's holding the Christ, and she's like staring down at the judge on this theologian in deep judgment. So like, to me, that's like the Sophiologist has to see that as wisdom, like judging this tyrant for what he is and what he's done. But anyway, so later on in the story, wisdom is actually given sanctuary through the means of a gypsy girl into Notre Dame, and then a golden knight whose name is Phoebus is the captain of the guard. He enters the city too to be a pawn or a tool for the judge to continue to find all the sin and stuff like that in the city. And there's a moment where, in his pursuit of wisdom in the form of this new gypsy girl, he enters into the sanctuary of Notre Dame at the same time as her. Oh. And so it's at the moment that both wisdom herself and the competent Messiah, Christ-like, figure re-entering our given sanctuary into the soul of the city, that Quasimodo, the half-formed being, is made whole again and comes into this transformation. Right. But there's so many goodies in this movie because he goes through this moment where he interacts with Esmeralda, who's this new gypsy form of wisdom, and he thinks that she's going to fall in love with him, right? So but he learns that wisdom is not for him to have, like she's not a possession,
right?
And in the end of the movie, it's really interesting because he has to learn, in order for him to really become fully formed, he has to understand and put himself in right relationship with wisdom and with the Messiah, the Savior. And when that happens is, there's this big fire, and at the end of the climax of the movie, and wisdom goes up to the bell tower and is given sanctuary, and then Quasimodo falls, and it's the actual knight in shining armor that saves him from the fire and then brings him back up to the bell tower with her. And he says, wow, you guys are my friends. And then he consummates the marriage between wisdom and the competent hero, the Savior, and realizes that these are my friends, and becomes fully formed. So that was such a long thing, but I wanted to let you know that.
That's good,
because
it's a good reading.
I thought that it might be of interest to you and to the audience, because I think that it's a good intuitive way to get a hold of what, from my limited perspective, what Sophiology is attempting to articulate.
Well, it's trying to, like you said, or you said, right relationship. It's the notion is to form proper relationships to the world and to nature. I mean, that's why I think there's an ecological aspect to it. There's an educational. In my book Transfiguration, for instance, there's chapters on economy, on education, on the arts, on technology. How do we cultivate? And the thing is, it's so easy, even without the technological, to become estranged from what's real. And it's even more difficult, with people who play the metaverse, right? That's the anti-Sophiology right there. That's as far as away as you can get from Sophiology. So how do we cultivate? How do we as Vervaeke says, form practices
Yeah.
that allow us to return to this relationship to the real. And which is to have a relationship to the real is to have meaning in one's life.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah. So, I don't know how to convey like the appreciation I have for you coming on and sharing all of this wonderful stuff with us here. So I have like a link to your website in the description.
Okay.
Is there any kind of events or let's say, I don't know, big things coming up for you? Like what's in the future for you is basically what I'm asking.
Well, planting seeds. No, I do in late April 29th and 30th, and maybe to the 1st. I'm gonna do a course here on the farm called Biodynamic Farming and Gardening as Christian Path.
Ooh.
I originally had planned on doing an online thing, because I do have some online courses, but they're more lecture and reading based. But it was hard to get film of me doing work, because when I'm doing work, I'm just too busy doing work.
Right.
So I think what I'll do is I'll have lectures and actual practical activities in this course, this 2-day course. And if people want to stick around for the next day, they can come to our farm's May Day festival on the 1st of May.
Wow. It just sounds like you're just having way too much fun.
It's not always over there. It's hard work. But farming is a wonder. It's really hard, and so many things can go wrong, but it's so satisfying to be embedded in the real world.
Yeah, well, I mean, how more real world could you get than something like farming, where, like you just said, it's really hard because so many things can go wrong. And what's a better arena to cultivate wisdom than in a place where rules
and humility,
right, and like formulas just are not going to provide the answer. Nothing
but I had it all written out.
Right. Right. So yeah, with that, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. It was really a pleasure to speak with you. If we get a chance to speak in the future, that would be awesome.
I'd love to. Yeah, anytime.
Okay. So